My lord, we have the Republic ship immobilized by a tractor beam. It's alongside us now, and we've connected docking clamps to the airlocks. The boarding parties are waiting on you.
We can't waste any more time.
My lord, we have the Republic ship immobilized by a tractor beam. It's alongside us now, and we've connected docking clamps to the airlocks. The boarding parties are waiting on you.
We can't waste any more time.
I'm talking about Frank. I'm talking about character. I'm talking about... Hell, Leo, I ain't embarrassed to use the word. I'm talking about ethics. You know I'm a sporting man. I like to lay an occasional bet, but I ain't that sporty. When I fix a fight, say I pay a 3-to-1 favor to throw a goddamn fight, I figure I got the right to expect that fight to go off 3-to-1. But every time I lay a bet with this son of a bitch Barney Bonbon, before I know it, the odds is even up. Or worse, I'm betting on the short money. The sheeny knows I like short things. He's selling the information. I fixed the fight. Out of town money comes pouring in. The odds go straight to hell. I don't know who's selling to it. Maybe the Los Angeles government. I don't know. The Williams. Bernie ain't satisfied with the honest dollar he can make off the paper. He ain't satisfied with the business I do on his book. He is selling tips on how I bet. And that means part of the payoff is you ride on my head, is ride on someone else's. So, back we go to these questions. Friendship. Character. Ethics. So clear what I'm saying.
As much.
It's getting so a businessman can't expect no return from a fixed fight. Now, if you can't fuck no fix, what can you try?
to get things done. With Monday.com, it's easy, fun, and simple. Just add the workflow that suits you. Whether you're a small team or a big organization, everyone will know who's doing it. Click drag and drop to create your board exactly the way you want it. Mention your teammates in real time, share files, assign people to tasks, stay in control on the go with our mobile apps, and see exactly who's responsible for what. With just a few clicks, you can plan for the future and manage your workload visually. Like a Gantt chart, but simple, intuitive, and totally...
Perhaps you've noticed we no longer have old people in this country. They're all gone now, replaced by senior citizens. Somehow we wound up with millions of these unfortunate creatures known as golden agers or mature adults. These are cold, lifeless, antiseptic terms, typically American, all ways of sidestepping the fear of aging. And it's not difficult to understand the fear of aging. It's natural and it's universal. No one wants to get old. No one wants to die. But we do. We die. And we don't like that. So we shade the truth. I started doing it when I reached my 40s. I'd look in the mirror at that time and think, well, I guess I'm getting older. That sounded a little better than old. Sounded like it might even last a bit longer. But people forget that older is comparative, and they use it as an absolute. She's an older woman. Oh, really? Older than what? Than she used to be? Well, yeah. So? People think getting old is bad because they think being old is bad. But you know something? Being old is just fine. In fact, it can be terrific. And anyway, it's one of those things you don't get to choose. It's not optional. But that insufferable group among us known as baby boomers, ages 42 through 59 as of 2005, are beginning to get old, and they're having trouble dealing with that. Remember, these baby boomers are the ones who gave us this soft, politically correct language in the first place. So rather than admit they're getting old, the baby boomers have come up with a new term to describe themselves as they approach the grave. They don't care for middle age, so instead, get this, folks, instead, they claim to be pre-elderly. Don't you love that? Pre-elderly. It's a real word. You don't hear it a lot, but it's out there. The boomers claim that if you're between 50 and 65, you're pre-elderly. But I'd be willing to bet that in 2011, when they begin turning 65, they will not be calling themselves elderly. I have a hunch they'll come up with some new way of avoiding reality. And I have a suggestion for them. They should call themselves the pre-dead. It's a perfect term because for them, it's accurate and it's highly descriptive. By the way, those ever clever boomers have also come up with a word to describe the jobs they feel are most suitable for retired people who wish to keep working. They call these jobs elder-friendly. Isn't that sad? God, that's just really, really sad. And so, to sum it up, we have these senior citizens. And whether I like that phrase or not, unfortunately, I got used to it. And I no longer react too violently when I hear it. But there is still one description for old people that I'll never accept. That's when I hear someone describe an old guy as being, for instance, 80 years young. Even though I know it's tongue-in-cheek, it makes my skin crawl. It's overly cute and precious, and it's an evasion. It's junk language. On CBS's 60 Minutes, Leslie Stahl, God help her, actually referred to some old man as being a 90-something. Please, Leslie, I need a small personal break here. One last pathetic example in this category. On the radio, I heard Matt Drudge actually refer to people of age. And he wasn't being sarcastic. He said the West Nile virus is a particular threat to people of age. Poor Matt. Apparently he's more fucked up than he seems. Now, going to an adjacent subject, one unfortunate fact of life for many of these 80 or 90-somethings is that they're forced to live in places where they'd rather not be. Old people's homes. So what name should we use for these places where we hide our old people? When I was a little boy, there was a building in my neighborhood called the Home for the Aged. It had a copper sign on the gate. Home for the aged. It always looked deserted. I never saw anyone go in. Naturally, I never saw anyone come out either. Later, I noticed people started calling those places nursing homes and rest homes. Apparently, it was decided that some of these old people needed nurses, while others just needed a little rest. What you hear them called now is retirement homes, or long-term care facilities. There's another one of those truly bloodless terms, long-term care facility. But actually, it makes sense to give it a name like that, because if you do, you make it a lot easier for the person you're putting in there to acquiesce and cooperate with you. I remember old people used to tell their families, whatever you do, don't put me in a home. Please, don't put me in a home. But it's hard to imagine one of them saying, whatever you do, don't put me in a long-term care facility. So calling it that is really a trick. Come on, Grandpa, it's not a home. It's a long-term care facility. By the way, while we're on this subject of the language of getting old, I want to tell you something that happened to me in New York on a recent evening. I was standing in line at the Carnegie Deli to pay my check, and there was a guy ahead of me who looked like he was in his 60s. He gave the cashier a $10 bill, but apparently it wasn't enough. When the cashier mentioned it to him in a nice way, he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I guess I had a senior moment." And I thought how sad that was. To blame a simple mistake on the fact that you're in your 60s, even if you're just sort of joking, as if anyone would think a 20-year-old couldn't make the same mistake. I only mention this because it's an example of how people can brainwash themselves by adopting popular language. I wanted to pull him aside and say, listen, I just heard you refer to yourself as a senior, and I wanted to ask, were you by any chance a junior last year? Because if you weren't a junior last year, then you're not a senior this year. I wanted to say it, but I figured, why would he listen to me? After all, I'm still a freshman.
I really haven't seen this many people in one place since they took the group photographs of all the criminals and lawbreakers in the Ronald Reagan administration. Yeah, oh. 225 of them so far. 225 different people in the Ronald Reagan administration have either quit, been fired, been arrested, indicted, or convicted of either breaking the law or violating the ethics code. 225 of them. And Edwin Meese alone has been investigated by 3 separate special prosecutors, and there's a 4th one waiting for him in Washington right now. 3 separate special prosecutors have had to look into the activities of the Attorney General, and the Attorney General is the nation's leading law enforcement officer. See, that's what you got to remember. This is the Ronald Reagan administration we're talking about. These are the law and order people. These are the people who are against street crime. They want to put street criminals in jail to make life safer for the business criminals. They're against street crime. Yeah, they're against street crime, providing that street isn't Wall Street. And the Supreme Court decided about a year ago that it's all right to put people in jail now if we just think they're going to commit a crime. It's called preventive detention. All you've got to do now is just think they're going to commit a crime. Well, if we'd have known this shit 7 or 8 years ago, we could have put a bunch of these Republican motherfuckers directly into prison. Put them in the joint where they belong, and we could have saved the money of putting these country club pin-headed assholes on trial. Another thing you got to remember, this is the group of people who were elected with the help of the moral majority. Elected with the help of the moral majority and the Teamsters Union. That's a good combination. Organized religion and organized crime working together to help build a better America. Another thing. Keep in mind, these Reagan people are the ones that were going to get government off our backs. Remember that? That was the rhetoric of the 1980 campaign. We'll get government off your backs and out of your lives. Yeah, but they still want to tell you what magazines you can read, and they still want to tell you what rock lyrics you can listen to, and they still want to force your kids to pray in school, and they still want to tell you what you can say on the radio. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, decided all by itself that radio and television were the only two parts of American life not protected by the free speech provisions of the First Amendment to the Constitution. I'd like to repeat that because it sounds vaguely important. The FCC, an appointed body, not elected, answerable only to the president, decided on its own that radio and television were the only two parts of American life not protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution. And why did they decide that? Because they got a letter from a minister in Mississippi. A Reverend Donald Wildman in Mississippi heard something on the radio that he didn't like. Well, Reverend, did anyone ever tell you there are two knobs on the radio? Of course, I'm sure the Reverend isn't that comfortable with anything that has two knobs on it. But hey, Reverend, there are two knobs on the radio. One of them turns the radio off, and the other one changes the station. Imagine that, Reverend. You can actually change the station. It's called freedom of choice, and it's one of the principles this country was founded upon. Look it up in the library, Reverend, if you have any of them left when you finish burning all the books. Now, I don't know how you feel, but I have personally just about had it with these fucking church people. Just about had it. Yeah. You know what I say we should do with these churches? Tax them. Tax these motherfuckers. If they're so interested in politics and government and public policy, let them pay their fucking admission price like everybody else. You know what I mean? Tax them. Hey, the Catholic Church alone could wipe out the federal budget deficit if all you did was tax them on their real estate holdings. And speaking of real estate holdings, let's get back to Ronald Reagan and his criminal gang. When last we left them, they were going to get government off our backs. Yeah, but when it comes to abortion, they don't mind government being in a woman's uterus, do they? Yeah, backs are no good, but uterus is okay by them. These people call themselves right-to-lifers. Don't you love that phrase? Don't you love the way these kind of people pervert the English language? Right-to-lifers. You realize that most of the right-to-lifers are in favor of the death penalty? And they support the South American death squads, and they're against gun control, and they're against nuclear weapons control. When they say right to life, they're talking about their right to decide which people should live or die. So these right-wingers, you know, so these Reagan people, these right-wingers in general, these crypto-fascists, they're against homosexuality. They're against pornography. They're against sex education. They're against abortion. Yeah, they're going to get government off your back, but they're going to tell you how to live your sex life. And let me ask you this, how would they know anything about it? Have you ever taken a look at those people? No wonder they're afraid of their bodies. Take a look at them. Doesn't it strike you as mildly ironic that most of the people who are against abortion are people you wouldn't want to fuck in the first place? Strike you a little strange? Hey, I'm the first one to say it's a great country, but it's a strange culture. This is a place where alcohol ruins more lives than cancer, and everybody gets upset when some athlete gets hooked on cocaine. You know, Time Magazine and Newsweek, they put cocaine on the cover, but they put the liquor advertisements inside the magazine. It's the old American double standard, you know, say one thing, do something different. And of course, the country is founded on the double standard. That's our history. We were founded on a very basic double standard. This country was founded by slave owners who wanted to be free. Am I right? A group of slave owners who wanted to be free. So they killed a lot of white English people in order to continue owning their black African people, so they could wipe out the rest of the red Indian people and move west and steal the rest of the land from the brown Mexican people, giving them a place to take off and drop their nuclear weapons on the yellow Japanese people. You know what the motto? You know what the motto of this country ought to be? You give us a color, we'll wipe it out. You got it. So anyway, about 80 years after the Constitution is ratified, 80 years later, the slaves are freed. Not so you'd really notice it, of course. Just sort of on paper. And that was, of course, during the Civil War. Now, there's another phrase I dearly love. That is a true oxymoron if I've ever heard one. Civil War. Do you think any country could really have a civil war? Say, pardon me. I'm awfully sorry. I'm awfully sorry. So, now, of course, the Civil War has been over for about 120 years, but not so you'd really notice it. Because we still have these people called Civil War buffs. People who thought it was a really keen war. And they study the battles carefully, and they try to improve on the strategies and the tactics to increase the body count, in case we have to go through it again sometime. In fact, some of these people actually get dressed up in uniform once a year and go out and refight these battles. You know what I say? Use live ammunition, assholes, would you please? You might just raise the intelligence level of the American gene pool. But what do you expect? Hey, come on, this is a warlike country. We come from that Northern European, basically the Northern European genes, the blue eyes, those blue eyes. Boy, everybody in the world learned real quick, didn't they? When those blue eyes sail out of the north, you better nail everything down, motherfucker. Nail it down, strap it down, or they'll grab it. If they can't take it home, they'll burn it. If they can't burn it, they'll fuck it. That's what happened to us. And it's a warlike country, come on. I mean, forget foreign policy, even the domestic rhetoric is warlike. Everything about our domestic policy invokes the thought of war. We don't like something in this country, we declare war on it. The war on poverty, the war on drugs, the war on crime, the war on AIDS, the war on cancer. We got the only national anthem that mentions fucking rockets and bombs in the goddamn thing, you know what I mean? All right.
Welcome to XM's Performance Theater. I'm Sonny Fox, and we are honoring this time around an icon, a fellow who has really changed comedy as we know it, literally. He's celebrating 50 years of entertainment this year. He's gone through more changes than most people do in a lifetime, and he's invited us along on those changes. And sort of like the Beatles, we've gone through those changes with him. And he spent 50 years, think about that, 50 years making us laugh. And more importantly, in some people's opinion, he's spent 50 years making us think. Would you welcome, please, Mr. George Carlin.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks for coming.
Sure.
It's your first visit to XM, right?
Yes, it is. Is this okay, distance and everything?
Sure.
Good.
You look pretty good for an old fart.
Well, first time I've done makeup for radio. Old fart is...
Oh, I forgot. You're not an old fart. You're...
an old fuck.
Yeah, right. That was,
I'm an old fuck. Kind of like a fat fuck, tall fuck, the skinny fuck, short fuck, you know. It's not old man. Old man is kind of like not an age or a period of your life. Old man is a point of view, you know? It's a way of looking at the world. There are some guys who are old men in their 20s and 30s. You've seen them. You know, they just got old mannish ways. Sometimes you see a little kid with, glasses and a double-breasted suit, and he's like a little old man. You know? So it's not old man. It's not old fart, which is kind of like... It's old fuck, you know. In this respect, fuck is a synonym for the word fellow.
Well, you look pretty good for an old fellow.
Well, I feel pretty good for a 69-year-old guy. Yep.
You're going to be celebrating 70 next month?
That's right, May. Yeah.
Wow. 70 years old. Now, 50 years in show business, when I was doing some research, I thought, how often do you speak to somebody who's worked with Ed Sullivan and Keanu Reeves? That's quite a... Who's more fun, by the way?
Keanu is really fun on the set with Alex Winter. I was in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure with the two of them. And then the sequel, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey.
Right.
Yeah, they were a lot of fun. They were very strange, but you know, well, they would never calm down until they call for action on a shot. They would clown and kid around and play grab ass and everything right up until the last second, and then it would be like and action, and suddenly they would be in the scene. And it threw me because I was trying to be an actor, you know, I was trying to be serious about what I had to do.
Right.
And I'd have to just stand there and kind of like keep my mind on my first line, you know, because I'm not a trained actor. And
we'll talk about your movie career, and we're going to invite
such
people.
as it is.
Yes. Invite people up for questions throughout
Good.
this whole thing.
Good.
But I do want to go back to what started this whole thing.
Right.
You were born in New York.
That started it.
Now,
Is this collar okay?
Oh,
Is collar straight?
looks great.
I'm kind of fussy about the collar.
Your mother made a rather important decision when you were just a baby to
With my dad?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a drinker, and he was a very successful advertising salesman in newspapers, selling space. And he was an accomplished public speaker, after dinner speaker, they called him. And he was a drinker and a bit of a bully. He never did beat her or touch her or anything like that, but he kind of terrorized her and was abusive to my brother. So she didn't want that happening to me. And when I was 2 months old and my brother was 5 years old, she took us out the fire escape window in her father's apartment in New York. I in her arms and my brother at her hand, down the fire escape into the backyard, through the backyards out to Broadway, and into my uncle's Packard. So she never looked back, and she got back into business in advertising and raised two boys during the last half of the recession, the Depression, the Great Depression, and the Second World War. So she did quite a job.
Your mom's been quite an influence on you.
Yeah, well, she was the sole parent, of course, and she was absent because she had to work. So I did a lot of parenting to myself. I engaged in a lot of mental activity to kind of fill the void which children will do, and I had radio to listen to. But she was very conscious of language, as was her father. Her father, a New York City policeman, my grandpa, whom I never knew. I never knew anything. I never knew my father either. I had one parent in my experience. And my grandfather was a cop in New York, 20 years, around, way back, because they were all rather old when their kids were born. So as a result, this was in the 1890s. And he wrote out, my grandfather, wrote out many of the works of Shakespeare longhand during his lifetime because of the joy it gave him. That was the explanation he had. So that's an indication of the language gene at work. And my mother inherited that. The Irish have that to a great degree. Some do, some don't. But it's kind of a generalization, but it's true. It's an Irish trait, language. And gift of gab. My father had it, my mother had it. So it was natural for me to have that, and then she reinforced it. These things have to be reinforced as well, and she reinforced it in me.
Now, your brother, Patrick, was 5 years older than you.
Patrick, yes.
Usually when you have a brother 5 years older, you usually become the punching bag.
No.
Well, how did
he was too
handle
busy out getting laid and fighting and drinking. He didn't want to bother with that. He didn't have time for bullying, and it's not in his nature, really. You know what he told me? He said, when you came home from the hospital, and you know about how a young child can react to a new baby in the house. There are kind of certain horror stories you hear about how tough it is for the kid to adjust to that, and sometimes it's hostility. He said, I was so glad when you came home from the hospital. He said, I was so curious about you, and I used to watch you in the crib, you know, and so he has a wonderful, wonderful nature, but he inherited, I think, also my father's temper, so he was more of a fighter than I was. In the neighborhood, he was a physical guy, you know, in the bars and on the street corners. But I wasn't really of that type.
You, in fact, used one of Patrick's jokes last night on stage.
Yeah, he's a great guy. He's still alive, of course, up in Woodstock. He said something that I wrote down a long time ago, and I just started saying it recently. He said, what we should do is take all the mentally defective people in this country and give them government jobs and just sit back and watch things improve. He's a pretty funny guy and very verbal, very, very verbal. More so than I even, I think.
You and him have a sort of the same perspective on things, don't you?
Pat and I?
Yeah.
Yeah, we both feel it's... you know, we're both opposed to organized religion. We're both opposed to, the way government had, the way the citizens have organized themselves in this country, which passes for government. I think the republic is a failure. We both, for the most part, think this experiment was nice while it lasted, and we're not too impressed with the human species, because, the record is rather not a good one. And so we inhabit the same area in those kind of philosophical areas, and we talk a lot on the phone a couple of times a week, and we have, you see what we have, I'm 69 years old now, he's 75, and we have common memories, we have common experiences and nomenclature and things in our childhood that I can call him up and mention a brand name that is no longer in existence, like Ipana toothpaste. I can call up and I can say, Pat, Ipana. He'll say, yeah, wow, It's so great. We're we're Irish. There's another generalization. The Irish are very kind of sentimental and like that, and there's a nostalgia that we love. And we're both a bug for those artifacts of our childhood, and it's just nice to have that. So common vocabulary, common background, common memories,
Do you remember, by the way, the spokesperson for Ipana on television?
I can be reminded. No.
Bucky Beaver.
I didn't know that. I did not know that. Really?
That's
television?
how old I am.
No. We're radio kids.
Right.
I mean, we experienced television when we came home from the street corner, but we didn't hang on the television set after school the way the next generation did. We were radio kids, and then as fast as we could get out of the house, we were street corner guys.
Speaking of street corner, you hung around Morningside Heights.
Morningside Heights.
But you had a different name for it.
Well, they called it Morningside Heights Columbia University because of political reasons of their own. We lived in what we called White Harlem. It was the west side of Harlem. It was technically, in a manner of speaking, the white area of West Harlem. We had Cuban, Puerto Rican, a lot of Dominican, great number of Dominicans in Manhattan now, and Black Harlem, of course. So we lived in a kind of a mixed area, especially as you got out from the Irish enclave. We lived in a little, I would call it an Irish enclave, and as you went out from actually on LaSalle Street, at one time on LaSalle Street, one half of that street was white, and the other half of it was black. And there wasn't a lot of hostility. I mean, there were occasional things, and there were attitudes probably that people held privately. I don't know. I never had that in my household. I never had those words and those attitudes expressed. So I didn't have them. But I know I heard the kids around me, but there was never any open hostility, because when you live in the area between two very different areas, you have to learn to get along. It's a luxury to live in the middle of one of those areas and have all these attitudes and, have a chip on your shoulder. But when you live right where the two of them join, you're forced to sort of live in the third area, which is the mixture. And it's very nice. It's very,
it's a good way to start your life.
Well, the people in that area of your childhood certainly impressed you. You shared them with all of us. Father Rivera. Was he really that lenient? You could actually see the line move at confession?
Yeah, Father, we had we had about 6 priests in the parish. Father Kelly, Father Ford was the pastor, Father Russell, Father Smith. And some of them came and went, and I don't remember the names, Father Daly and Father Halpern and Father Rivera, who was there primarily because there was starting to be more of a Spanish representation. I don't use words like Latino and Hispanic. I say what we grew up with, Hispanic people. You know? Spanish heritage. Somewhere in their mixed blood, there's Spain. So I call them Spanish people. Father Rivera was there to serve them, pastor them. Or I should say, to tend to their pastoral needs, and one of them was confessional. And Father Rivera didn't understand. I mean, he understood English, but he didn't sound like he understood English. and we would go to Father Rivera because he was notorious. That's probably not the right word. He was famously more lenient, and you would get a lighter sentence, a lighter penance, confession. And you could see people would switch the line. People on Father Kelly's line, when Father Rivera would show up and they'd kiss the stole and put it on and go in the confessional, you would see people race and rush over to Father Rivera's line. Father Rivera, I say, come here, man. He didn't question you. Some of the priests, they would question, so how did you touch yourself? How did you touch yourself, son? He didn't go into any of that, how I touched myself.
No, you just started.
He didn't want it.
You just started doing a voice. You used to sit around a tape recorder and record these things.
Well, this was a turning point in my life, and it's one that people should know about. When I was a young boy, I was a mimic, and I could imitate people in the neighborhood, authority figures, teachers, shop owners, other parents, cops on the beat, and people on television. I could do a little imitation. They were largely imitations of other people doing it. That's how you learn to teach every time you see another guy do it on stage and you say, oh, okay, and you copy him. It's easy because they point out the highlights of the speech. But neighborhood stuff. I was kind of the class clown in school, and then after school I was kind of like the neighborhood wise guy, one of the neighborhood wise guys on the street corner, and I would gather a little audience because I would put together little routines. I had little parodies that I did. I lifted things everyone steals from comedians when they're starting. So I would steal imitations in Humphrey Bogart and Jimmy Cagney and Peter Lorre, and I would do fake commercials that I had heard or read in Mad. Well, Mad Comics came along a little bit later. There was another magazine called 1,000 Jokes. And I put together little routines, and they would say, Georgie, hey, Georgie, do that thing about such and I would stand up and do it, and it would come out differently each time. And I developed this ability to stand up in front of a group of people and get their attention and get their approval. That was important to me, apparently. When I was a little kid, I'd go to my mother's office and she'd say, imitate Ned West, do the imitations. And I would do the imitations for the ladies in her office, and they would laugh. And I noticed, I don't remember noticing this per se, but I must have noticed that this got me the attention of adults. But don't forget, I was alone in the house most of the day. When I wasn't in school, I was alone. I got the attention of these adults, and I got their approval through their laughter. They were more or less saying, good boy, George, good going, way to go. Yes, he's good, he's cute. Ain't I cute, ain't I clever? That's what this job is. So as a youngster, I wanted to be a comedian. I was probably only 8 or 9 or 10 years old when I began to form an idea that I wanted to be in movies like Danny Kaye and like Red Skelton. And I called that being an actor, but it was actually being a comedian. And pretty soon I found out the word comedian, and I wanted to be a comedian. And when I graduated from 8th grade, the last thing I graduated from, by the way, my mother asked me what I wanted, and one of the brothers at school, Brother Conrad, had told us that we could get a clergyman's discount on camera. So I asked him if he could get a clergyman's discount on tape recorder. Now, this was 5 years after the Second World War. Tape recorders had come out as consumer items, but they were as big as a small Buick. They were large. They were like this big, and you had to buy them in a showroom up the street. They were on sale in stores. I bought this big web core, long story, and I'm keeping it long, that I used it to do voices and do little sketches and skits and fake radio shows and fake newscasts and commercials. And I used it to more or less train myself for the thing I wanted to do. My mother was very progressive to have bought me that as a graduation present. I mean, she was a far thinker to see that in me and go ahead and foster that and reward that. Even though she didn't want me to follow it, but she knew it was a healthy thing for me to be doing.
You've always been a planner.
Yeah,
you had this optimistic,
plans, they call it.
This optimistic attitude that if you planned it well enough and you meant well, it's going to happen. You believe that?
Well, I would only plan things I felt, that obviously that I wanted and thought I was qualified for. But this is the good example of this career planning. When I was a kid, I said, well, first I'll be. See, I wanted to be an actor. I called it actor because I saw them in the movies and I knew they were movie actors. So Danny Kaye and these guys, I thought actor. Okay, so first I'll be a stand-up comedian. And don't forget, when I was a kid, the only place stand-up comedians worked was nightclubs. Those kind of really more or less sophisticated places where you saw in the movies, and people dance and there was a singer. And it was a comic, and I never got into those places. I was too young, and it wasn't in my world. So I knew about comedians from radio and from television later, but movies when I was a youngster. So I aimed at that, and I thought, well, the way to get there in comedian to first get into radio. That would be my first move, because then I could practice using my voice, and I could learn to speak and do a lot of these things without an audience directly in front of me, which is the usual thing on radio. They're not sitting in the studio. And therefore, I wouldn't be as nervous or afraid, and I could kind of build up my confidence, and then I could become a stand-up comedian, because by then there were further venues for comedians. I thought, then I can be a stand-up comedian, and then I can go, then if I'm really good at that, then they have to let me in the movies. And that was the way I looked at it. They had to let me in the movies. And that was the plan, and it became more sophisticated as I went through 13, 14, 15 years and started to actually think of ways to go about it.
Now, you actually revealed your life's plan in, what, you 11 years old?
Yeah, when I was 11, was 5th grade, Sister Nina, and I saw her, by the way, just about 3 or 4 years ago. She came to a show of mine up in Wisconsin. Yeah, she was 81, sharp as can be. Sharp, thin, quick, She said, yeah, you lived on the top of the hill. They remembered me for other reasons, but she actually remembered that I lived right up the block from the school. 5th grade, Sister Nina, I used to sing at the club meeting. They had once a week, they'd have a club meeting, and there'd be new business and old business and all that kind of stuff. And then there'd be the entertainment. You could do an imitation, you could bring in your banjo, play the piano, sing a song. I would always stand up and sing a song. I sang Mañana in her class. Mañana, mañana, mañana is soon enough for me. And, some of the guys thought it was goofy, and some of them liked it. But in Sister Nina's class, we were assigned to write an autobiography. I think 5th grade is about time to look back on your life. So, part of the autobiography was the last page, and that page was what I'm going to be. And I said, I want to be either an actor, announcer, disc jockey, imitator, I guess I called it, or an actor. I must have started with actor. Actor, comedian, imitator, announcer, or something like that. So there it was, right in front of everyone. And there was a nice amalgam. You can tell that the thing I wanted most was attention. That was really what that sentence was all about. Ain't I cute, ain't I clever, look at me.
Well, you went to the Army, you got that out of the way.
Air Force, yeah.
Air Force, sorry. And luckily there was a radio station.
Yeah.
Just off base. Yeah. It was in Shreveport, right?
Shreveport, Louisiana, which sounds like a kind of a dopey place for this. Actually, it was a very hot radio market. They had 9 radio stations at that time, and it was very competitive. And top 40 radio was just beginning, and rock and roll was just beginning, because Elvis Presley's first hit came out in I believe 55 or 56. And there I was right on the cusp of all of that. And I wanted to be this announcer, disc jockey guy, when I got out of the Air Force. My plan was to go in the Air Force, do 4 years from 17 to 21, get out at the age of 21, and use the GI Bill to go to school to learn to be an announcer and a disc jockey, so that I would be learning when I was 21. Now, I got in there, and when I was 18, I was in an amateur play downtown in Shreveport, in a very good community theater company, by the way, Shreveport Little Theater. And I was doing a play called Golden Boy, and in it was Joe Monroe. And Joe Monroe was famous as a radio personality in Shreveport. I was out on the base. I was in the Air Force out on the base. And in my off time, I would do this play. And Joe was a famous radio personality. He did the morning show. He did the afternoon drive time. And I didn't know he owned the station. But so it was a really great station, KJOV in Shreveport.
That wasn't the clue?
Yeah, well, you know, there was a slight inkling in my mind, but I didn't know that he was the outright owner. Actually, he was 51%.